Welcome back to Next Gen Console Watch, our show following all the news and updates on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X. I'm Daemon Hatfield. Joining me, as always, are Max Scoville, host of IGN's PlayStation podcast, Podcast Beyond, and Ryan McCaffrey, host of IGN's Xbox podcast, Podcast Unlocked.
Max, raring to go today.
I want to talk about video games already.
Up until now, there has been a lot of overlap between this and previous generation consoles, and not much that you can only play on your PS5 or Xbox Series X. Last year, PlayStation's biggest games, Horizon Forbidden West and God of War Ragnarok, you could play those on PS4. There's still a lot of that over on Xbox too. Halo Infinite and Forza Horizon 5, you can both play on your Xbox One. However, it seems that things are finally changing now. IGN has a hands-on preview of Final Fantasy 16 up, which you should check out if you're interested in that game. And our previewer was talking to the developers and found out that, according to them, Final Fantasy 16 had to be a PS5 generation only game. What they were trying to accomplish could not be done on previous generation consoles. The reason for that, for not being cross-generation, isn't down to its impressive graphics. Its combat system relies on the memory and transfer speed of the PS5 system. Final Fantasy 16's boss battles seamlessly blend between player-controlled combat and cinematic cutscenes, and to create this blend, with no load screens or fade-to-black moments, the development team at Square Enix has relied on the power of the PS5. Producer Naoki Yoshida says, while you're battling Ifrit and Garuda and having that big battle, in the background, the PS5 is loading the next scene. It's getting ready so we can seamlessly move into it. Final Fantasy 16 is coming in June, but there are other more recent games that have gone the next-gen, current-gen only route. Of course, Hogwarts Legacy launched first on current generation systems. That's going to be one of the biggest selling games of the year. PSVR 2 has arrived. You have to have a PS5 to play that. EA is getting on board with current gen only. Of course, Star Wars Jedi Survivor is a current gen only game. I wasn't aware of this also. EA Sports PGA Tour is a current gen only game, and EA's sports games have a very mass market casual audience that I think it's actually a little bit surprising that EA is counting on that more casual audience to jump into the current gen ecosystem. And then coming up this year, of course, Redfall, Suicide Squad. Later in the year, Baldur's B3 is a PS5 console exclusive. Whenever Spider-Man 2 hits, that will be PS5 only. And then Starfield, Stalker 2 over on Xbox, current gen only. So, Max, let's start with you. Would you agree that it seems like we're actually finally leaving last generation behind?
I think so. I think Sony releasing a $550 PlayStation 5 exclusive peripheral is a pretty good sign that we're kind of heading in that direction. It'd be nice if they put out some games that sort of followed suit. Sounds like they're going to pretty soon. We're about, 2.5 years into this console generation? That seems to be about the sweet spot for when sort of that console generation takes off. And that's sort of been true of, the past two consoles as well. 2015, phenomenal year for games. And it was because it was a lot of like PS4, Xbox One era games that finally kind of left behind the previous generation. But it's funny because a lot of the stuff we think of as being the best games of last gen, there's a few of them that do have backwards, like Rise of the Tomb Raider, for instance, that's one. Alien Isolation. I think Shadow of Mordor was.
It was kind of nerfed on the old consoles, but it did come out on both generations.
Yeah, I mean there were a bunch that were cross-gen, and it's kind of I think most people probably played them on that last generation. We're seeing, I think, sort of the tail end of that with this gen. But the big sort of difference this time around is that both platforms are backwards compatible. So there's really not that huge of a motivation for publishers to try to leave everyone behind. Because if you've got this massive install base, obviously people want to probably sell more expensive games and sell new hardware and all that. But why leave behind this massive swath of people who own the old hardware?
Ryan, what's your take?
Yeah, it's just it's a byproduct of the continued PC-ification of consoles. And I don't mean that in any sort of negative way at all. It's just, consoles used to be...
You mean like personal computer, not politically correct?
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Thank you for clarifying. Consoles used to be hyper-proprietary pieces of technology up through, Nintendo always. They're using NVIDIA-based stuff now, so they're even Nintendo's gone a little more, PC-like in the architect, like the underlying system architecture. Sony, finally, the light went on for them after the PS3 era with the Cell processor.
Mm-hmm.
That was, remember, they made such a big deal out of Cell, and because it's like, it's going to do all this, and it's so cool, and then presumably they listened to their developers who had it much easier on the 360 side, which the 360 all the Xboxes have basically been PCs in a box, and a big part of the 360's success and why a lot of third-party games were either as good or better on the 360 than they were on the PS3 is because developers had that they would lead on that platform and then like, all right, we'll figure out how to get this over onto the cell architecture on PS3. But yeah, now these are just high-octane PCs with that are sort of streamlined for their specific gaming purpose, and so there's no need to have a hard stop and be like, all right, nope, we can't support the old thing anymore. Like, no, they totally can. And to your point, Max, it's why leave behind tens, if not hundreds of millions of customers as you transition and only, finally now 2.5 years in, it's we're finally seeing that old stuff left behind, and it's the developers I'm sure are all super relieved. I just talked to Stig Asmussen, the game director on Star Wars Jedi Survivor, and we talked about that. It was like, what do the new consoles do for you? And it's just, the loading times, this, that, the other thing, and I'm sure he's thrilled to not have to also support, kind of figure out how to cram that game onto the older hardware with very little RAM and all that. Yeah, this is going to be a forever thing. This is not going to we're not going to walk back the other way and suddenly go back to hard stop and hard start over console generations. It's going to be like this forever now.
No, it's going to be like phones.
Yeah.
Like it's just that kind of just sort of sliding from one generation to the next. At a certain point, you're like, this thing's feeling a little sluggish. Should probably upgrade.
Yeah.
The funny thing is, I do a monthly video about the big kind of game releases that are coming out, and it used to be fairly succinct to round up like what platforms things are coming to, but now it's sort of like, oh, did we say new gen? We say last gen? What is what are the different platforms? If something comes out for PS3 or not PS3, nothing's coming out for PS3. Something comes out for PS4 and Xbox One. You can play it on PS5 and Xbox Series X, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's for those platforms.
Exactly.
It's that weird thing like when you pull up a cross-gen game, the PlayStation gives you sort of the option to pick one. But in the case of like Xbox, they've got smart delivery, where it's just kind of
we'll pick the best one for you. Yeah,
we'll make it look good. Relax, sit back, play your game. It'll be fine.
But yeah, I mean, does Sony, as we've talked about, they don't have very many first-party games announced at all at the moment, but the big one is Spider-Man and Wolverine, and those are both PS5 only. And on Xbox, Daemon, you were mentioning a few of them that I think Minecraft Legends which is out next month. I think the last cross-gen, and then the big boys. Daemon, you mentioned most of them. It's Starfield, Redfall, Forza Motorsport. Those three biggies this year, all next-gen only, and then on into Perfect Dark, Fable, Avowed, et cetera, are all going to be Xbox Series X only.
I've heard the weird little wrinkle here is the Series S, which is
with the Baldur's Gate 3 thing you're talking about.
Well, I mean, just pretty much everything is kind of hung up on that. I imagine there's a lot of things that like there's next gen and there's sort of next gen with an asterisk. And I think the Series S is awesome, but it's got like just slightly less powerful to the point that sort of it slows everybody down.
Well, yeah, there was a story last week that, sorry, Daemon, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but Baldur's Gate 3, which you mentioned as a PS5 console exclusive, that maybe that's not like official because we had a quote on IGN from the developers who just said, yeah, we're having a little bit of a tough time right now getting our split screen co-op to work as well as we want on both Series X and Series S, which I think it's not hard to read between the lines there and means, well, which of those two do you think is having the problem? It's not the Series X, it's the Series S. So I suspect that when that comment went public, the folks at Larian Studios immediately got calls from Microsoft and engineers saying, yeah, how can we help you guys out? Let's make sure we get an Xbox version day and date of Baldur's Gate 3, which sure would be nice for Xbox gamers. But yeah, the Series S side of it, I mean, I reviewed that both Xboxes when they launched for IGN, and in my Series S review, I called out. I said, this console is great for now, and that has, as you mentioned, Max, it's proven out absolutely correct. It's been a great sort of transition device, especially during the supply chain crunch here. A few years in, it could be a problem, and guess what? We're already almost a few years in. So yeah, we'll see how the Series S piece of it ends up.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we're
factoring in.
going to start seeing things that are just Series X exclusive. If they're just going to cut
That's what
that
I was
out
going to ask
entirely.
Ryan.
Yeah,
Yeah, sometime during this generation, is that possible? That
I don't
there
think
could just be
so.
some
I mean,
software?
No, I say that not from I just think politically, I think Microsoft's, they've drawn that line, they've established it right from the jump here that this is the Series generation. I don't think they're gonna allow anything to forego the Series S. I mean, I could easily be wrong, and I suppose there's a part of me that hopes I'm wrong so that we get games pushing the envelope more, especially when we do get the inevitable mid-cycle console refresh. Well, then what the hell happens to the Series S? Do they just discontinue it and the Series X gets cut way down in price? And I don't know. Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of an adventure on the Xbox side as this gen goes along, but it does seem like Microsoft, they've introduced a lot of people into the Xbox ecosystem through the Series S, and I can't imagine we're going to get to any point in this generation where Microsoft is going to say to those people, no, you can't play this new game.
I'm reminded of when I think Nintendo put out, there was the 3DS, there's the basic 3DS, and then towards the end they put out the new 3DS, I think, and there was like a very small handful of games that needed the slightly more powerful version. And I think they were just sort of like, let's hope that this messaging doesn't cause too much confusion. And I think it was fine. I didn't really hear anybody complaining about it too much because it was such a small, amount of games that actually made use of it. But yeah, the other sort of rogue element here is cloud, because that doesn't really depend much on what's actually in the guts of the device you're playing on. And Microsoft does have that kind of at the ready with xCloud. So if you're playing on an Xbox One or Series S, if there's a little asterisk that says playable through xCloud only or something.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that right now with one of the first, and for a while only, next-gen only Xbox Series games was Microsoft Flight Simulator. And that was one of the first games where you could play it on your Xbox One through the cloud, exactly as you're talking about. So
Which is suitable because the planes, in fact, go through the literal clouds. It works out well.
So I guess maybe that's going to be the solution. Which we're seeing that on the Switch right now. Not that that's like a generational thing. It's just a Nintendo. It's an aging hardware thing, and some of these third parties are like, well, we can try to sell some Switch copies. We just have to stream the game through the cloud because we can't physically get it to work natively on the hardware. So, every day's a new adventure here.
If the mid-generation refresh is inevitable, as you say, how far back into the generation do you think that's been pushed because of this situation where there's been such a longer overlap between the two generations?
Well, first of all, I would be willing to bet lunch that there won't be a 1-year gap between the PS5 Pro and the Xbox Series X.5.
XYZ. Yeah.
Which we saw last time. The One X came out a year later, but was notably more powerful. But yeah, I think they'll probably both be hit pretty close, as the two consoles themselves did. But yeah, I mean, I have to imagine that it's a minimum of a 1-year delay from whatever the original schedule was, but I would even guess 2, because if we're thinking 8 years for this console generation, and we're already in year 3, well, there's no way we're getting a PS5 Pro and a Series X whatever next Christmas holiday 2024. No chance.
No, I could see maybe some kind of redesign for the PS5. Like one of those,
slimmer, smaller.
Not actually anything in the inside, but one of those like, hey, look at it, it's
which Sony's done every generation.
Malibu Stacy's a new hat, whatever. It's one of those things.
But yeah, I think fall 2025 at the earliest. Maybe it's even sometime in 26, and then the generation probably goes out an extra year past where they were initially thinking.
Well, there are still, a good handful of cross-generation games that are coming out. Resident Evil 4, Street Fighter 6 in June, and Diablo 4. All those you can play on your past-gen systems. But it seems like in the back half of the year, both Sony and Microsoft are ready to leave the last generation behind with Spider-Man 2 and Starfield. Before we go, we have the results of the poll from last episode. We were talking about that new gameplay we saw for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. We asked our dear audience and fans, how excited are you for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League? 67% of you are not excited.
That's not
great
great
news
for them.
for that game.
2/3.
67%. 25% said they'll play it at some point, no rush. And then only 8% said they are very excited for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League.
Yikes.
Well, luckily everything else going on at WB is just fine right now, so I'm sure it's just nothing to worry about. Yeah.
And it's not like there are any other games coming out in late May or June that, that would distract people from giving Suicide Squad a try. So I'm sure it'll be fine.
I will watch that game's release with great interest. New poll for you to vote on for next episode. What is the most significant advancement for games this generation, in your opinion? Is it the non-existent loading times? Is it the console startup time? Having graphics options? Is it hardware like the DualSense controller? Make sure to vote at IGN.com. We'll share the results with you next episode. And that's going to do it for this edition of Next Gen Console Watch. Do we need to change the name now? Is it Current Gen Console Watch now?
We already started talking about the mid console.
Nope, I'm being told we have to keep calling it Next Gen Console Watch. Them's the breaks. Thank you to both Max and Ryan. Thank you to everyone working in our San Francisco and LA studios to make this episode possible. My name is Daemon. We'll be back next week with more PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X news. We'll see you then.